A warm welcome to all of you. Let me begin with a formal introduction of the panelists. To begin with, Mr. Santosh Vashant Kumar is the Senior General Manager, Mahindra Electric Mobility. We have Dr. Vinayak Ram, who's an Associate Professor at BITS Pilani. We have Dr. Abdul Penjari, an Associate Professor at Indian Institute of Sciences, heading the what's known in short form as SISTUP, expands to Center for Infrastructure, Sustainable Development and Sustainable Transport and Urban Development, Urban Planning. We have Mr. Sudeep Maiti from WRI, World Resources Institute, headquartered in Washington, but he works with the India division of WRI. We have Mr. Ravi, who works with UITP as a consultant. UITP, I guess, here is one of the oldest institutes, more than 130 years old, if I'm not wrong. The full form sounds a little confusing, a French name, I guess. The more English version of it is International Association for Public Transport, if I'm not wrong. Okay, so yeah, the reason we all have come together today is to discuss how urban commute in general is going to be affected by COVID-19 situation. We all know life is not going to be the same. We've seen multiple reports from BCG, PwC coming up, which keep discussing about how employment, how corporate collaboration, how different institutions, different industries are going to change post COVID-19. Unfortunately, though, I haven't seen as many reports or as much discussion happening on urban commute or public transport in general. So that is the whole idea here. Biker decided to begin that conversation. We're planning to have a series of panel discussions with experts like you. This is the first in that discussion. The specific topic for today's discussion is challenges of urban commute post COVID-19 in Indian cities. So the first question, the most obvious question is, when do we expect public transport to resume? Especially in the cities like Bangalore, Hyderabad. I understand Mumbai and Delhi might come in way later, but what about the lesser affected cities? It's an open forum. Anyone who has inputs on it can pitch in.
I could go first if that's all right.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Sure.
So, okay, I think there are a couple of things to consider here. The first fact is that everyone is still trying to figure out what the trend of the pandemic is going to really be, what is that trajectory is really going to be. And there are quite a few theories that have been mathematical models that are being put forward. Some say that flattening the curve would essentially mean that this period of lockdowns, etc., need to be longer so that the curve stays flattened. There are other cases where we are talking about that it needs to be a combination of lockdowns and it needs to be a combination of periods between lockdowns so that there is some sort of a control. But I think the question really is that given the kind of economy that India has, the fact that there's a lot of people who are dependent on day-to-day wages and accessing work, accessing education, accessing all opportunities, can we really afford to not start public transport, and can that and how long can we actually do that? I think really the question is, when do we start public transport, and how do we start public transport in a way that it is resilient? It is taking into consideration that there might be another surge, but how do we kind of prep the public transport in a way that it will still be able to serve the citizens so that they may access some essentials, they may access some their work sites, they may access their jobs. I think that is really the question. So when you say it's really a question about when for all the cities, and how is, I think, going to be one integral question as well. I'm going to pause here and everyone being.
Awesome. Maybe Siddharth, I can go next. I'll just add a couple of things here. Hope my voice is audible to everyone.
Yeah, you're pretty clear, sir.
Okay, I agree with Sudeep. I think what we need to consider is also the fact that what has probably COVID changed in terms of consumer preferences as well as corporate preferences in this process. I think we need to also take that into account while we decide, and that's what I think a lot of governments, including the Indian government, is looking at in terms of making a decision on can we do it in a phased manner, and if we do it in a phased manner, what are the things that we need to account for whenever we open up. Of course, as small and medium businesses, people will be extremely eager to open up because they are the most vulnerable sort of businesses at this stage. However, I think each business has a responsibility, talking about from an industry point of view, in terms of making the right calls, in terms of ensuring, number one, employee safety and public safety before we can take any call in the business. Now, that could mean a lot of these norms, and maybe we get a chance to talk about it later. But a lot of these habits that's probably that we are following during the lockdown days will probably become a norm when we open up. The fact that we are doing a webinar here in usual times, we might have done it as a face-to-face meeting or a conference call or a meeting. That really shows that the industry has come a long way in terms of number one, adapting itself to this environment, and two, at the same time, being conscious of the fact that this is extremely necessary for us to take a call on opening up the businesses. So we have to do the business as usual is no longer exists. So we have to act in a responsive manner. And secondly, coming to the actual specific question on public transport, of course, we have also seen BMTC and the likes of those government kind of state transport authorities talk about a few aspects of what they are addressing. Maybe for 40% is what BMTCs are talking about whenever they open up in terms of the capacity they would allow. So I really think we have to look at it from a case by case basis and also segment basis, and also finally hotspot versus not basis before we actually figure out how and when do we open up.
Okay. Dr. Abdul, would you like to come in as to how probably metro versus buses versus ride sharing facilities like Ola, Uber, which of these are going to be the safest ways to start, and what do you think the government would be doing going ahead?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me on this, and nice to meet many of you. And Mr. Santosh, nice to see you again. You were there in the workshop that we did at IAC last June. So, can you ask your question again? I'm sorry, I didn't follow because of some connection problem.
Yeah. So what we're understanding is what we are doing today during lockdown, a lot of it is going to continue even post the lockdown. There's still not a lot of clarity because things are still unraveling. We are still not sure about when public transport can actually start, and when it does, BMTC is talking about a possible 40% capacity resumption. What do you think is going to start first, or what do you think should start first? Should it be a metro connection? Should it be a bus connection? Should be a combination of both? Should be ride-hailing services like Ola, Uber? What do you think is the safest to begin with in the phased manner?
So I guess in terms of when, as Sudip and Mr. Santosh was mentioning, a lot of it depends on how the trajectory of this the infection spread will be, how, where, and how fast, and all that. Quite a bit of epidemiology modeling has been taking place now in Bangalore and other places. So they are considering these scenarios, with public transport starts, what will likely happen, and so on and so forth. Um, 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 it will help to, I think, look into those scenario analyses, and see what will be the rate, what will be the change in the rate of spread when, where, also if public transport opens, and in what forms it opens, so that we'll have more informed answer to the important questions that you're asking. So I think it'll help to actually start getting information from some of those analyses. That way we'll be a bit more informed. Right now, I would say it's difficult to answer when. It depends quite a lot on the trajectory, and it's all path dependent. Because you know um, if infection spreads in a certain way, because in a certain place and at a certain time, and that might make things worse. If it doesn't, that might make things look better. So there's a lot of path dependency on it. Now, in at the same time, as Sudhit was appropriately saying, economic activity also is important. So that answers the why question: why open economic activity and all that. The when and how, when depends a lot on what happens, and I think we have to rely more on these analyses models, and not just one model, maybe an ensemble of models to see various outcomes, various information, so that we deal with the uncertainty of these models also. But how, I think, as Mr. Santosh and Sudeep was also mentioning, social distancing to the extent possible, if it's encouraged, if and if disinfection on a regular basis is done, that will help. That certainly means reduced capacity, and I believe BMTC has started, not for public, but they are running buses for specific corporates, and of course for public health workers and all the frontline people who are really out there, managing things, helping all of us. They are running buses as we speak, I believe. um, uh, uh, at least, maybe 100 or a couple of hundred, a few hundred buses are being run for them. So they are on, not for general public, though. Yeah, starting to open things in a phased manner. However, after relying on information from analysis, I think will help. Now, which mode to open first? Again, it all depends on which is safer, which encourages more social distancing, and of course also on which is, I guess, affordable for a lot of people. So uh, that is what I would say. Then specifically mentioning this mode first, that mode later, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And consumer preferences, I think, as well as corporate preferences, as I think Mr. Santosh was saying, traveler preferences will have changed quite a bit. One worry is this is not about opening, when to open, but far down the lane. Let's say 6 months or a year down the lane, when hopefully things become normal. But still, this is big enough shock that people's preferences have changed for the long term. So public transit will likely take a hit, because people will be afraid, some of them, and their preferences might shift away. So transit may have to, take extra measures, and they are already doing, I think. Even the BMTC buses that are running now for the frontline people, they are disinfecting on a regular basis, based on a method and an approach that is recommended by the healthcare departments and all that. So they are doing already, and then people have to wear masks. And in some places, if not in Bangalore, I believe they're thinking of people only who have these contact tracing apps on their phones, riding them and so on. So all those practices are already being put in place. In some sense, agencies like BMTC and other public transit agencies, where there is, in some sense, greater following of these practices, that might help. I am sure even the private entities will also do that. But in situations where some of the private operators, if they don't follow it, that can become difficult. And hopefully regulations will be in place to make sure that is followed, as well as they also follow it in spirit as well. Yeah, I'll stop here. And
Okay, okay. Uh, Dr. Vinayak, Ravi, either of you, would you like to come in this?
Yeah. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. So it was nice to hear from all three of you. Wonderful points have been discussed. So in addition to those points, my points are a couple of points I would like to discuss in addition to whatever the other gentlemen spoke. One is the initiation or starting of the mass transformation is a kind of risky job at this point of time because social distancing is a norm, and that is what is required for us right now to actually prevent this spread of this virus. In case if it is done in a hurry, it's going to be pretty dangerous. So, in the community spread, starting the third station spread right now, in the country it is not there at this point of time. But by being hasty in initiating the mass transportation might actually trigger that situation. So we have to be pretty careful about that. And I spoke with one of the ex-engineering chief of APSRTC, erstwhile Andhra Pradesh State Road Transportation Corporation. So he was a transportation specialist, and he was involved in many of the decision-making process. Even now, he is an advisor there for RTC activities. So I was discussing about this issue, and he was like very skeptical about what exactly is going to happen in Hyderabad, especially the whole Telangana and particularly Hyderabad. People are really suffering because of the lockdown and also the stoppages from mass transportation. So he was not very clear about when the RTC is going to start and when the vehicles will actually be allowed to fly in the roads. So this is one thing which I got. But right now, as Professor Abdul was saying, it's pretty uncertain at this point of time. It's not very clear. Like we can't say that there are various timelines by which we are going to initiate public transportation. And what kind of transportation has to be there? That is one part of your question. So it should be like whatever, whether it is metro or a bus or a, IPT like auto rickshaw or whatever you are starting. All these systems should be following the social distancing. And of course, these corporations, whichever the corporations involved, they should actually take care that the safety is given the topmost priority. Like by the time the instantaneous test kits should be available with these corporations, and the people the public whoever is entering would be a metro station or a bus stop, they have to get tested and then they have to use. So it's going to be pretty careful. Actually, people cannot take any risk. Even a single person who is with COVID-19 enters into a public transportation. So entire bus will get affected. It's very dangerous. So that is one thing, and I don't know how exactly it is going to be made practical. So pre-check is something which is important. And of course, one more thing is like mass transportation is principally for those people who are not economically well off. Most of the people who are above this category, mostly they will have their own vehicles, personalized transportation systems. So we need to think from those perspectives, like what is it which is going to happen. Now, even RTC was thinking about because of a lot of losses which are incurred during the lockout, there could be a possibility of enhancement of fares post-COVID scenario. So, under such kind of situation, whether it is going to be really comfortable for the poor people or people who can't afford to pay so much money towards transportation, whether they will be able to travel comfortably or not. This is something which is really bothering the transport organizations at this point of time. During my interview with him, he was also expressing this particular point. So this is one thing which we need to think about. Then secondly, one of the most important point is like already we heard that from many of the cities, the labor people who shifted to the cities, they got relocated to their own places. We heard several stories of A lot of chaos happening there. Many people were gathering at one single place and all. Now, to run the current activities like infrastructure activities or whatever the industrial activities, we require those people back in the cities. So, what is it we are going to do? I mean, how to bring them back safely back to the work, and what kind of strategies which are supposed to be adopted. A good amount of research, good amount of discussion is required between the experts as well as the transport authorities. So then only things will be all right. I mean, it's a kind of good beginning which you have made at this point of time. Uh, if you can talk to many other people like the decision-making authorities who can control these things like the mass transportation activities. I think that should be helping, and it should take us forward. But at this point of time, the things are not very clear is something which I would like to say. These are the points which I just wanted to tell you for the question which you asked. Yeah, done.
Thank you, sir. I guess the what from what I understand is, one is we are not very clear when things are going to get back to normal, or forget normal, when things are going to start opening up again. Even the opening up itself is obviously going to happen in a phased manner, but that opening up itself is very uncertain right now. We have to wait and watch, see how things unroll. The second thing that I understand is, while there is a pressure of increasing costs due to the incurred losses, already incurred losses, the unit economics will also go up because we are talking of reduced capacity. The same buses that were carrying 70 to 80 people at one point are going to be carrying 25 to 30. So the unit economics is also going to go up. So that brings me to the question, and Ravi, this is for you. We understand health is going to be the biggest exchequer, biggest part of the government expense post this. If it doesn't happen, there's obviously no point of having a government anymore. That this is something very clear. Governments across the globe are going to have to make public health their biggest expense. But does this also mean public transport shoots up in that priority list? Public transport comes up probably next only to health, probably even bigger than defense expense. I'm not sure. What is your take, Ravi, on that?
Yeah, thanks for that. See, first, I'm itching to respond to the previous question on when we should start the public transport.
Sure,
So the
sure,
thing
sure.
is, for me, it's not a question of whether or when. Actually, we should have started 3 weeks back, or even during the lockdown, we should have continued operation. The thing is, the question is, public transport is only a response to the overall economic activity and the travel activity in the city. It's not that because public transport is not operational, people are sitting at home. So government has already asked police, health workers, a lot of essential services to be operated. All the grocery stores around my area are open, and people come there every day who earn 10,000, 12,000 rupees a day, and they have to basically spend a lot on their own vehicles to come. So already we are doing a disservice by not operating, I think. And even now there is more economic activity happening, and more people are joining workforce, and the economic activities that are started are basic primary requirements, where labor intensive activities are initiated, and they definitely can't come on their own vehicles, and you can't expect their contractors to actually arrange really good quality vehicles for them. So forget about social distancing, they'll be actually crammed into vehicles where they are provided, and where they're not provided they lose access to livelihoods, which is even worse for the activities government already started. So actually we should have started or we should have continued operations all through this while. But like others have highlighted, it's of course risky to have people in. So the nature of public transport is to have a lot of people in a very efficient space, which goes against what COVID social distancing, physical distancing proposed measures are. So that way, public transport is the most in control. For example, the entire Bangalore city is covered by just 6,500 buses, whereas if you there are 2 lakh auto rickshaws, 1 lakh 50,000 taxis. So as a government, if I want people to be in a controlled environment, public transport gives me the best option of doing that compared to any other private mode of transport. So I think it's not even a question of when, we should have started already, and every day is a delay. But we should of course make it safe. And we are not the only country suffering from this, unfortunately. So there are many others, and there are different solutions emerging across the world that we are seeing. So some of the things like, for example, Hong Kong has mandated masks for everybody. London has mandated people only enter from the middle or the back door and not from the front door, so that the exposure to the drivers is reduced. And of course, everywhere people are reducing the vehicle capacity itself and having lesser people on the bus. So there are different measures which can follow, and we of course need to disinfect the buses every day. We need to have sanitization at the end of every trip. So there are different ways of making it as safe as possible. But the thing is, it's not just public transport that is at stake. People are moving otherwise also. So this gives us the safest option, I think. The second question that you mentioned, of course, is about the financial risk. And so what happens after this? So again, public transport in India is not just formal public transport. There is a lot of informal public transport also. I think they are the ones most affected through this crisis. At some point, BMTC may show losses on their books at the end of the year. BMTC, TSRTC, all the government STUs. At some point, they may be made good, or they'll still keep floating. So that's the best part of formal public transport, that there is some government backing by design.
Yeah.
So even though we may not have very good quality buses being bought the next year as planned in the budget, it may cut down, but the basic essential service will continue to be operated. However, that is insufficient to carry the travel demand in the city. So, because people have traveled, shifted a lot to private modes of transport, BMTC is still functioning with 6,700 buses. If people actually use it more, we need many more buses, which we don't have, and we can't procure now with the current situation. So, we still need the private shared modes like two-wheelers, the three-wheeler, and the taxis. So the thing is, first is how to make it safe, and there are some ways being shown, like we have the pollution under control certificates. COL is experimenting where every fuel station has a disinfectant station also, and every day people go there and get their vehicle disinfected and get some sort of a label or a certificate, and you need to do it every day. That's visible for the people also. Second question is about the finances. I think that is where the critical aspect is. These people are equivalent to daily wage laborers in terms of their revenue sources. As a typical auto rickshaw operator, people buy a vehicle, take a loan for 4 or 5 years, and the vehicle actually operates only for 8 years or so. It's just 3 years where they actually make money, and their EMIs are continuing anyway. So there's no moratorium on that. So there are two ways things can emerge from here. Firstly, they'll default a lot, much more default. But at the same time, it's also their livelihood. It's not like they are there as an employee, so they'll be there. So what government should do? Of course, we should support public transport. For me, the biggest expectation is that a lot of wasteful expenditure will come down. I mean, we definitely don't need steel flyovers anymore and all these expressways that are being proposed. So I hope that some of the budget allocated for that moves to transport. And within transport, of course, we need support to BMTC, but also we need to take care of the livelihood issues of these taxi operators, three-wheeler operators. Firstly, to make sure that they don't go bankrupt, and at the same time, there is also I mean, this is just a exploratory idea, but we can see more of consolidation among the sector also. We don't really know. So right now, they are all individual owner come operators. But now that their vehicles are at stake and stuff like that, what if there is consolidation? What if there are aggregators who purchase these vehicles? For example, if Ola or Uber sees that a lot of their drivers go bankrupt and they can't be on the platform anymore, will they become asset owners and not just trip-wise? I mean, they call them driver partners, but basically, so right now they don't own any assets. Maybe they'll start owning assets as well and have more control on operations. So these kinds of situations may emerge.
I can add to Ravi's points, if that's all right. Yeah. So your question is what happens, like if we have a lockdown off and on sort of a situation in the next 1 year, what's going to be the ridership like, and what does the BMTC going to be like, operations going to be like, at least for public transport. So there, one aspect to consider here is that so let's talk about urban bus systems, right? So the urban bus systems, there are about 3-4 models that operate in different parts of the country, right? So you have corporations like BMTC, corporations like BMTC, while Mumbai has buses being run by the municipal corporation, so they are known as undertakings, right? You also have SPVs like, Bhubaneswar, etc. They have SPVs where they have a GCC model, and they get an operator to come on board, and they have a very specific model to do it. There are other cities where you have private operators come on board. So the transport department kind of they give you a license to operate on a particular route, and they take a per seat tax, per passenger tax, right? Now, at this point, at this point, being a corporation or a government entity allows you automatically gives you an advantage to access bailout support as an because it is a government organization. So, like Ravi said, that there's a good chance that BMTC will get financial assistance, maybe a part of it, but it will get some financial assistance, and we may not have 9,000 buses going into next year, but we may still have the 6,500, and therefore be able to operate as well. But what happens to cases where there are private operators, where the entire risk of the operations is completely falls on the private operator? For example, Mangalore has a whole, Bangalore runs on a similar system. In Kochi, they have a similar system. So we already have all these operators saying that this is not going to be possible for us to get out of, because we have loans, we have taxes, and we can't operate at full capacities, which is the equation that really worked for them. If they can't do that, then what's going to happen? So the need for there's definitely going to be a huge impact on ridership, and that's just because and that's not just because people are afraid. People who can afford to be afraid and take other measures will take other measures, but that still leaves a whole lot more people who will still are very captive to this public transport. And for them uh, uh, even if they do want to take it, there's going to be social distancing, and the buses are not going to be able to take that load. So there's going to be a huge divide between what is the supply and what is the demand, right? So there will need to be many strategies, so that to ensure that economic opportunity is not impacted, but yet people who really need the transportation service do access transportation service. Starting off with, what are possible financial supports that can be given to these agencies, so that some level of public transport is still maintained. I think that is going to be very crucial going into next year. And it may not it's definitely, public health might be the top ranking, but this is not going to be too far down the ladder of priorities. I think access is going to be a huge priority. But and this is going to be really important for the operators, because their operating costs, their per unit operating cost, is also going to go up tremendously. It's not their current operating cost is not going to go into the next year, because they can't take the load. They're going to have much, and they have to sanitize after every ride. They're going to operating costs are going to going to increase exponentially. So how does the government step in to ensure that some of these things are mitigated, so make it viable for these operations to run? Is going to be very, very crucial going into the next year. As operations themselves, because there's a huge difference between the demand and the supply, I think one thing that people have to be still encouraged going into the next year is people who can afford to work from home, please work from home. All right. Then we have the people who need the services. So in this case, because the buses cannot carry that many people, the number of routes need to be consolidated, so that those particular routes can have high frequency buses. That means that those people can be cleared off much more quickly. Otherwise, what's going to happen is that you're going to have one bus come in, everyone wants to get in, and there the social distancing, I think, kind of just goes through the window. And even if they don't, if the bus does not allow the extra passengers to come in, by the crowding starts happening at the bus stop. So there's going to be, there will need to, I think there will need to be a relook at how operations, urban operations are run in going forward in this period. I think those are the two major points that I'd like to make. Yeah.
So my understanding is a lot of these startups like Bounce or Yulu, which have come in, I understand they don't work for long distance urban commute, but the uh, as you call that, the hyper local urban commute is something that they are addressing to a large extent. And then obviously the part that the private players play, you gave some examples of Bhubaneswar having private players being a part of the public transport system, but my understanding is
Kochi and Mangalore. Kochi and Mangalore.
Kochi and Mangalore too. But my understanding is most of the cities in India do not allow private players to be have public transport to ply on public transport routes.
No, no. Kochi and Mangalore have different regulations. They do allow private
Yeah.
buses to operate. Yeah.
Yeah, only a couple of cities. I understand Delhi was one of the cities.
But even Hyderabad also, we have got private people for allowing the service to be happening on a public road. So it's taken by, I mean, government gives the permission based upon the thing. It's a kind of small scale employment kind of thing. So they generate employment by giving the private people the opportunity of running the public transportation. So there is a service called citizen service. So it's particularly accepted by the government that such kind of services are supposed to be running. So it's there right now. So they are really suffering. Though the government, of course, RTCs might spread back to the normalcy, but these private people who are running the public transportation, they are the biggest sufferers, basically. Anyway, please continue.
No, so my question is around that. I wasn't aware of Hyderabad already having started a pilot project on that. So, I would also like to get Mr. Santosh input on that as to how does he see electric mobility in specific coming in as a substitute, not a substitute, but as a supplement to complement basically the existing public transport routes. So, like Ravi was saying, the number of buses that we have are not going to be sufficient, obviously, as the capacities go down. And the government might not have enough money to bring in more assets, bring in more, ramp up the available number of buses or stuff. How do you think electric mobility, especially, can help with that reduction of unit economics? How do you think private players can come in with a reduced economics and complement the existing public services, government services?
Great question. Thanks, Siddharth, on that. I want to just bring back your question back to the ROI discussion that we just had. Because as we know, if you look at electric mobility, I think most of us know that the zero tailpipe commute, that is probably the future. India has been making progress with a lot of regulations and policies to help assist it. And at the same time, I do think that at the moment, what we say in the middle of every crisis, there lies a great opportunity. I do think that e-mobility is probably something that will help the lifestyle of the post-COVID era. Because it comes with a sort of a thinking of a safer commute and at the same time a cleaner commute, not just the safer commute, right? We keep seeing the pollution related issues. So when going back to the response on health becoming one of the major factors, I think we should not lose sight of the fact that electric mobility reduces the overall pollution also, because of which e-mobility will be looked at seriously the post-COVID era. At the same time, I do want to mention that, look, for example, public transportation is roughly around 48%, I believe, in Bangalore of the overall transportation. It's catering to 48%. So there lies opportunity even for the government to enhance or get more ridership in this process if there are policies which help that, and if there is the right kind of environment where they bring the confidence to the end commuters that public transportation is going to be a safer ride for them. It's no doubt that everybody is going to be impacted in terms of how they're going to approach. For example, in the case of Meru, which is one of the Mahindra companies, we have started doing ozone treatment of vehicles. Now, is that going to be a norm? Is that going to be sustainable in the long run? Probably not. But the need of the hour is to ensure that the vehicles are safer, it's hygienic before you take the next ride, right? So in that context, I think I'm optimistic that the governments do have a silver lining here for them to increase the ridership, providing the right kind of policies come up and right kind of regulations do come up. And in the end, I think moving towards electric commute, whether it's two-wheeler, three-wheeler, or four-wheeler, or even buses, is probably going to be the future. A quick point of note here: people, we always, I think, we've heard several, or we have read several reports where shared mobility is one of those areas that people think it's going to be impacted. Of course, there is a lot of truth behind that. Shared mobility has been impacted big time. We have seen, the first week of downtime when we had a lockdown, 90 to 95% of shared mobility was impacted. Now, going forward, what does it mean? What does it mean to the end commuters who don't have a choice? Are we going to see more sales of two-wheelers happening because of that, or are we going to see more sales of personal vehicles because shared mobility is something that people might be hesitant for the next 6 months to take? Now, again, these are all legitimate questions, and I think there is some truth behind a lot of these things. But at the end, we do expect, for example, three-wheelers is a different way of commute, and maybe for autos and in the remote segments, tier 2 cities and tier 3 cities where last mile commute needs to come back pretty strongly and pretty quickly. Autos, there might be a boom coming up, and electric three-wheelers, for example, will not only provide you an option for the best ROI, because e-mobility provides you the best ROI in terms of used in the right way in terms of utilization. But at the same time, it provides you a cleaner transport, not just in urban cities, but also in remote places.
If I may add to what Mr. Santosh was saying.
Sure.
So in the context of electric mobility and pollution, there is news these days that this the infection might spread more with air pollution also. Again, it's news. I'm not an expert in that area. So to the extent that air pollution exacerbates these respiratory problems combined with the infection, that's another reason for, I think, moving toward electric mobility to reduce at least pollution during the usage. So that again, as many of us were saying, even in the longer run, public transit might take a hit. That might mean more private personal vehicle usage, more low occupancy vehicle usage, and all that. That increases more number of vehicles on the network, which again might lead to pollution. Another reason why to move toward electric to reduce the pollution. And that might play a big role in the medium to long run, if not in the short term. And then even for last mile connectivity, for example, range issues will not be there, right? There's a lot of applications of last mile and short mile connectivity for electric vehicles. That also actually might help, especially for some of these hyperlocal providers. To the extent that they can help provide last mile connectivity to public transit, there might be there is scope for win-win between both public transit and the last mile service providers. That they both sort of increase demand for both transit as well as last mile. Yeah, I think there is a lot of scope for win-win there between both transit agency and last mile service providers if they partner. That can help increase the demand for both agencies as well as increase the vehicle fleet utilization for the last mile service providers who might otherwise, because of congestion, if they end up providing a lot of whole mile The congestion might make their vehicle get stuck in the traffic, and the vehicle fleet utilization will go up. Their revenue miles will go down, and so on. Again, another reason why last mile services might help. Yeah. Again, there is also a synergy for a scope for synergy with electric. Last mile electric vehicles combined with public transport providing line haul, so to say, that might help as well. Again, if not right away, in the medium to long run. While I am on the mic, another point that's another theme that's coming out from what both Ravi and Sudip mentioned is this whole supply versus demand. When restrictions are imposed to contain the spread of the epidemic, or when restrictions are eased, uh, I think they bring up a very important point that it's important to have more supply than demand to the extent possible. Otherwise, it'll will risk running into crowding. If we need to first, if we want to start restricting, we want to restrict demand or cut down demand first and then cut down supply, not the other way around. Similarly, if we want to start easing restrictions, we want to increase the supply first and then start unleashing the demand. Otherwise, there is a risk of crowding and all that, which goes against social distancing. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Ravi, you had a question.
No, actually, that was me.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Sorry, can I still ask my question? Actually, this was for Mr. Santosh, and while we were talking, while we are on the topic of electric mobility, there's a natural economic impact on how people are going to start spending in going forward in the next year or so. And one of the biggest aspects of electric mobility is the initial cost. While the OPEX might be much benefits from the OPEX might be much better, the CapEx is definitely something. It has been a difference so far. So, is there a need to look at how look at models on how electric mobility may be made available in the market today? Is there a need to relook at that? For example, I know that one electric two-wheeler company has moved on to a leasing model where they have gone for long-term leasing instead of short-term leasing, so that they're still affordable, and they're still they can be approached by the market, can be accessed by the market. So, is that a thought process that's happening in the industry in this aspect? That's my question to you.
Thanks, Sudeep. Let me try to answer that. I think if you look at the electric mobility market, we will have to look at the ROI for each and every segment. Once you start slicing the data. If you look at the corporate mobility segment, which is actually a significant chunk for cities such as Bangalore and Hyderabad, and that's where I think the four-wheelers sort of come into the picture. And this is where the hope is that we will have more electric buses also in future that will cater to the needs of corporate commute. I think the four-wheeler industry today, in terms of ROI, there is a lot of studies which is done, which clearly shows that there is a significant, I would say, advantage in running your fleet on electric vehicles. And that is what we have several of our partners working with Mahindra Electric who are actually doing that. However, I think your question is very valid and much more broader because it brings us back to how do we react to these situations such as COVID, which is sort of unprecedented, right? None of, for no leaders, it's been taught in the business schools on how to react for situations when an entire country is locked down. You pretty much, plan based on certain scenarios and what if scenarios that you do. But this is an unprecedented kind of situation. If you start looking at last mile, I think as Dr. Abdul was also saying, there is a significant advantage in running your last mile fleet using electric vehicles, and people are doing that, and we do hope that that's going to change the mobility landscape in India in the future. Whether it is two-wheelers, where we see potentially in future deliveries happening on electric vehicles, which actually is a significant chunk of the traffic that we see in cities such as Bangalore. or whether it is connectivity to the metro feeders that we have, and it could be vehicles such as our three-wheelers in the market today. I think the ROI speaks to itself in terms of how the vehicles are structured in terms of costing, number one. But secondly, I think going back to are there different business models in terms of leasing, in terms of rentals. There were several discussions happening in the industry even prior to this, because I'm a strong believer that we have to think ahead and we have to plan it ahead, not just react just because the COVID is out there. Now, COVID is probably just going to accelerate some of those thought process, which is going to help the community, which is going to make it better for our citizens. Now, in that context, obviously there are several new thoughts in terms of will there be a boom in the rental business that we see? And can those rental businesses be using electric vehicles? If ride sharing is going to be hurt in the interim, what is the longer term story on ride sharing? Because none of it, I feel, is probably, this is not a permanent in a situation that we are talking about. So I think as leaders, we have to really look at innovative business models. And for sure, I think when it comes to two-wheelers, last mile, and four-wheelers connectivity, it makes a significant difference when we start looking at some of these new business models enabled through digital technologies also. And that's one of the things I want to put out there, because when you look at public transport, people might start saying, I would probably have a preference now not to touch the ticket vending machine. So what do you do in those scenarios? So we also need to look at how does digital technologies augment what Sudeep you are saying in terms of new business models, whether it is rental per day for auto rickshaw drivers, or whether it is actually leasing models or rental models for your daily commute. So I think there are discussions happening, but that's probably a lot of these things will be accelerated because of the situation that we are.
All right, thank you.
We have 10 minutes left, and I have one question that we haven't touched upon yet. Something that's I think it's close to all of you. All of you have been a part of it. Things like safe access or transit-oriented development have been kind of buzzwords in when it comes to urban planning. And with the smart city project having picked up since the last 4 5 years, and a lot of greenfield cities coming up in India, how do you see this new reality of physical distancing affecting the transit-oriented development plans by themselves? I'm not talking of the implementation, the planning part itself. How do you see that changing? Is there going to be more space available for public transport access points? Are the public places going to be expanded and occupying a bigger percentage of city spaces, urban spaces? What do you think that is moving? Where do you see that moving? The infrastructure side. How's the infrastructure planning and development going to change with this need for physical distancing coming up?
I can take a stab at it if no one else wants to go first. Yeah. Okay. So frankly, I think one is that I think it's too early to say. It's really too early to say, because while this situation has required us to relook at many aspects of service provision or the evenness of service provision, it hasn't quite. I don't know if how much it has, what the impact has been on the aspect of urban planning as a whole. For example, if you just look at the real estate market, the demands currently haven't fluctuated that much. Everyone is in a status quo, where everyone just sitting still, waiting and watching and seeing what happens, and everyone's expecting that this might be something that is a 3 month or a 6 month, maybe a 3 month or a 2 quarter period, and it will blow over. And and if that is so, then there might not be very long-lasting implications on urban planning as such. There might be certain implications where you're talking about certain levels of service provisions in terms of water supplies, how much how many taps per unit population, can that be disaggregated, can that be a even distribution, etc. That will be strengthened for sure. But will it change from people moving from apartments to say plotted housing? I think that might be a little difficult to say at this point. Even commercial spaces wise, the from what I know, that there hasn't been a big shift in the ask for more offices, because the norms for spaces has changed. That hasn't been quite the conversation yet, but that doesn't mean that might not be the conversation going forward. It may also be it and we also have to be very cognizant of the fact that more space means more capital investments, and that's not something that everybody has. So it might also mean that we are more innovative about how we utilize that space. So the fact of the shifts in using the shifts in the employee strength in offices might be a norm going forward. But yeah, I think those are the couple of points I had to add.
So if I may um, uh, take a stab at that also, as Sudip was saying, yeah, I guess people are waiting and seeing how it's going to pan out before taking very long term decisions. So to answer your question, Siddharth, generally I guess the role of hygiene is going to increase in urban planning. Health and hygiene is going to increase. So provisions for that will likely increase. Um, uh, uh, so which will lead into this, to some extent, containing the spread of such epidemics and all that. So in what ways, in some, like Sudip was saying, some creativity I think is important, because we lack space. Space comes at a high constraint and all that. So that remains to be seen. And some of the other longer term changes will likely be, in terms of housing and all that, to the extent that some of the this situation leads to some long term changes. Let's say for work from home, if people do not have to travel as much for work, that might change their housing preferences, both for provisioning for work from home, as well as, well, I don't have to travel that far, I don't have to travel that long, well, why don't I move away a little bit and opt for a bigger house and so on. So that some of that might happen. And while I'm on the mic, also, some another longer term change that might merit some consideration is, can we afford concentrating the development only in big cities? Because all this has started from some of these big cities, and then we know that if it spreads into smaller places, rural places, it becomes out of hand and all that. So perhaps it's worth considering expanding the development to second tier, third tier, and other places, that helps reduce the crowding of these big cities, which also I think will have positive benefits in terms of containing the spread and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. So basically, deurbanization and being more innovative about how we are utilizing our public spaces that we have today are going to be the need of the hour. Ravi, you want to comment on that?
Yeah. See, if this triggers more public space given to people, that is definitely a welcome move. I think we are short of public spaces in our urban areas. We are trying to make every inch count for commercial value, whether it is enough bus stops, bus terminals, or even public parks, or just to get out of the metro station and you just land in commercial activity with no space to move around and stuff like that. So in general, we definitely need much more public space, and maybe if this triggers that, I'm only happy for that. Over the broader question of how the city development itself changes, so first is transit-oriented development. I think we need to qualify that word before asking for specific things. So the thing is, what theoretically the best way of doing transit-oriented development is to concentrate a lot of people and jobs around public transport so that people don't have to travel a lot, and if they have to travel, they have a nearby public transport available. What in India we construed that into transit adjacent development. We just use transit to increase land value and build high cost apartments, etc., and or commercial complexes. So people don't go from one commercial mall to another mall. They may go once in a while, but not on a daily basis. So we actually inverted the whole idea of transit-oriented development in India. Okay. So two things to answer your question. So one is there are things that won't change after coronavirus or the COVID lockdown also, which is the number of people that we have. Some may reduce, unfortunately, but largely our population won't change. So it doesn't mean that suddenly people will afford bigger houses. In fact, the economy is going down. So we have the same number of people with lesser money. So people want the whole idea of apartments and people staying together is to make as much efficiency out of the limited money and space we have as possible, which won't change. It's not like suddenly people are going to move to the suburbs and use their cars to come to the center of the city and things like that. So a lot of things won't change. So that is there. Second thing about the cities itself, de-urbanizing. Successive master plans in metropolitan cities have hoped for the situation. Somehow people get away from my city so that I don't have to provide services in infrastructure, do something else. But that won't happen. The whole idea of cities is to concentrate economic activity and then flourish from there. So the problem is that COVID is going against all the set principles of all these years. Use public transport because efficient, have more cities because they are more concentrated economic activities, and now we have to inverse the whole thing. So the best way is to find out ways to handling the virus spread or whatever within the given situation, rather than changing the way we want to live itself. So we should not let this virus decide the way we live our lives in general. We can't change the basic principles like why we need cities, why we need public transport, why we need public spaces. So those are essential things. This is just an aberration, I hope, and then we find ways to solve it rather than inverting the whole knowledge we have.
Actually, Ravi, I have my 2 cents on this. So I understand deurbanization has been a priority in India since a couple of decades at least now, since probably beginning of the millennium. But it's always been on paper or in speeches, not on ground or not an actual government expense. I haven't seen public health systems improving as much in tier 2, tier 3 cities as much as in tier 1. We obviously have gone ahead from the 4 metropolitans that we had into probably 15 bigger cities today, which have the most economic activity happening. But what has happened is a lot of the lower rung of the population, on the lower rung of the economic pyramid, has moved away from the bigger cities. They've gone back home, and they've realized that if such a situation arises again, they're going to be left stranded again. And this gives us that opportunity of psychological readiness in that population, which has been moving towards cities in search for economic opportunities, to look for these economic opportunities around. For example, in a city like Bangalore, you find a lot of people from the Northeast, from Odisha, from West Bengal, who are even working as petrol pump attendants. These guys who have gone back would like to look for similar, or security guards. These guys would like to look for more similar paying opportunities in their area. It's just the psychological readiness, but then obviously it comes down to the government being able to provide that opportunity to them there. So that I don't know. Yeah.
So firstly, this is a larger development issue. So I would try to restrict my comments to general public transport because that's where I spend more time. So I can give my opinion, but I don't take it as an expert opinion on what should happen. But my general sense is people come to cities also for the lifestyle, also for the extra amenities. So the government should do its part. You need to have basic infrastructure in the smaller cities also. You need to have a similar lifestyle also. So when I go outside India to European countries or wherever, so I don't see a lot of difference between basic essential stuff that people get in a London versus in Nottinghamshire or some of the smaller cities in the European countries. Whereas in India, it is stark. Everybody knows it. I don't even have to give examples. So without the government doing its bit, we can't expect people to go away because it is good for the society.
True, true. One last question to Dr. Vinayak. Sir, do you think the cycle-only model of BITS Pilani, it's time for that to be extended into the public places, into cities, make certain zones in cities like MG Road in Bangalore where no motorized vehicles are allowed?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Cycle only model will work only for a small, tripling.
Yeah.
If the tripling is more than a couple of kilometers, definitely people will not be, willing to travel by bicycle. That's a kind of mindset which is available at this point of time. Unless we do a lot of research in the cycle design itself by improving the efficiency of the bicycle. So, putting least energy and if you are in a position to travel more distance. So obviously that is one kind of idea which is possible. And of course, in Bristol Hyderabad campus we have a cycle system. There is a system called cycle where the bicycles are parked everywhere, and then it will be having a password, and using a mobile they will be opening the password, opening the bicycle, and then they can travel. So the total distance is accumulated in the app, and then finally at the end of the month they will have to pay the money online. So that kind of system they have introduced, and it is running beautifully. It's designed and completely operated by our own students. So likewise, even there is a village called Tumkunta near our campus. It's around 4 kilometers away, and people normally travel from here to the that village. From there, they can get the buses and all to go to the city. We are using a big auto rickshaw at this point of time. So our students are also working on creating a kind of transport system wherein they can simply start, and they will have a couple of handles like this, and simply a standing platform, and then that triggers based upon the battery system. So it's a very simple transportation mode which they are planning. It's like the childhood kids play, they call it a scooter. So similar kind of system which is having more stability as well as it's battery operated, and that kind of system our students are also developing. So once that is done, based upon the similar kind of concept of cycle, they are also going to introduce that system. So such kind of small things, if they are triggering from different parts of the country, in the city, then definitely that is going to work out. But the feasibility of initiating a cycle-only transportation system for the last mile connectivity problem, both at ingress level as well as egress level, it's going to be a real challenge. Unless we plan properly, and it may not be really feasible for all the locations. Wherever it is possible and feasible, definitely that has to be introduced. That is a very, very healthy system. In Sweden, the country like Sweden, people don't mind traveling for 30 miles per trip. So by bicycle. So if you provide unique routes for them, and well-established cycling systems, people don't mind. So that is always a very good idea to encourage basically. This is one thing, and in addition to that, a couple of points which I made for the earlier questions which you were asking regarding the smart city plan. Like I was going through some of the smart city plans, and what is going to change in this smart city plan is like this COVID-19 has given us an opportunity to think about what needs to be actually done when we have such kind of exigencies. Like COVID kind of exigencies are quite possible. It is not only the beginning. It may happen again and again, different names. So in those kind of situations, how exactly the city has to cope up. Right now, we are clueless at this point of time. Many of the cities are struggling because we are not having enough ideas to overcome this problem. So to come out of this difficult scenario, how exactly the city has to be planned. So a smart city planner should be adding this aspect into the overall planning aspect, and then try to design the city. That is one thing. And the second point is, as Sudhir was mentioning, It's like a company should actually go for rescheduling of the work hours. Like IT sector works 24/7, so there is no rescheduling possible there. But still, many other sectors which are wherever they work on 8-hour scale. So morning 5 to evening, morning 9 o'clock to evening 5 o'clock is a kind of routine time for them. So in such kind of situations, what we can do is we can ask the companies or offices to reschedule their working hours like 8 to 4, 9 to 5, 8:30, 9:30. Thereby, we are actually redistributing the traffic. The traffic congestion can be reduced, and this can be not only for the COVID-19 situation, even for the future also. It is going to be a kind of wonderful thing which is supposed to be taken by the city planners. So it has to be mandated. It is not like a company is given an option to go for that. They shall be asked to go in for such kind of activity where they have to very clearly define the working hours and they have to be very, very strict about it. Secondly, as the other panel members were also mentioning, like some people, even Professor Abdul was also mentioning during the other discussion, like the companies have to have some population of employees working for the option of work from home. So when they work from home, there is always a possibility that they are relocating at different place far away from the office. They need not really conglomerate in a given area. Thus, the traffic is increasing. So that kind of option has to be given. So some portion of the employees have to be given the option of working from home. Whoever is willing, they have to be given. And some persons can be actually asked to come to the office. Thereby, you are reducing the population by half or maybe a kind of percentage. So obviously, the social distancing is formed, and even travel demand also goes down, and that also helps the overall situation. So I think these are all the various points which I just thought about. I'm done with this.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Dr. Abdul, you wanted to come in?
Nothing. The cycle, bicycle, and non-motorized modes. I guess these are the modes that seem to offer both social distancing as well as
Yeah.
not a motorized, more sustainable types of
Solution.
way to travel. Remains to be seen how easy it is to provide for it though in big cities.
I mean, just to add on to that point, that there are cities like Paris and Italy who are taking this as an opportunity to completely shift how their streets are utilized, right? Paris is looking at 650 kilometers of cycleways. They're looking at these things called Corona cycleways, where it connects access between hospitals and for essential health workers. Italy's got some 35 kilometers of streets which are accessible, and they got more coming in. Many cities in the US is going to start doing this. I think it is an opportunity. And it could reshape how we look at our streets and how people travel.
Absolutely.
Siddharth, I just want to add a quick point here. I've been preview to some of the work that Dr. Abdul has been talking about. I'm really glad at some of the great work that he and his team has been doing. In fact, and we looking at the end, I think, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a permanent situation. So India is a thriving economy, and I think we all know Indians are very resilient when it comes to such situations. And going back to what Dr. Vinayak was saying, we have always been creative. We have always been innovative when it comes to going beyond and these kind of situations and coming out of it stronger. So I don't want to say that I think we are going to be looking at a positive future. I know Ravi made a comment, optimistic comment in the earlier part of this meeting, but I'm optimistic in terms of the kind of investments that people are waiting to do once they have a little bit of clarity on the situation. And at the same time, we all hope that in terms of we all got an opportunity to hit a mute button or a reset button at our on our side during this time. And I really think we should all, as a community, we should all take that for good times. And at some point in time, we'll be thinking, how did we spend the COVID days? So we all should make good memories out of this and plan in such a way that at a city level, we bring out certain policies which is futuristic, which also focus on the health of communities in future, addresses some of the last mile and making the a cleaner environment. Because just a simple thing, we're all sitting in Bangalore, but Delhiites might be wondering how, we have clean air. Why can't we have this throughout the year? So I think these are the kind of questions that we as citizens now need to ask and come up with solutions or investments that really makes a lot of these things sustainable.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. I think we have, Ravi, sure.
No, just as a closing remark,
Yeah.
I'm certainly optimistic. So we'll of course come out of the situation at some point, and then like Mr. Satosh was mentioning, we have all had time to reflect on what we are doing, and we'll have come out with better ideas, I hope. And the thing is, the basics won't change. Like I was emphasizing earlier also, we'll still have so many people. Public transport will still be the most efficient way of traveling. Of course, cycling should be promoted. So those things we knew even earlier. Electric mobility is a cleaner option. So it's just that we should use this as a platform to cut down the wasteful expenditure we've been doing, like all the road building and all the unnecessary stuff. And then now that we had time to reflect and identify priorities, not just the six of us, but as a society in general, we should identify the priorities and put the limited money that will be available for transport in the best possible areas.
I guess that's the best closing remark to kind of summarize all the discussion that we had. I would like to thank you all for coming on, making this session this interesting and insightful.